Authentication is the process of establishing the identity of a person, service, or device. It requires the person, service, or device to provide some type of credential to prove who they are. Authentication is like presenting ID when you're traveling. It doesn't confirm that you're ticketed, it just proves that you're who you say you are. Azure supports multiple authentication methods, including standard passwords, single sign-on (SSO), multi-factor authentication (MFA), and passwordless. For the longest time, security and convenience seem to be at odds with each other. Thankfully, new authentication solutions provide both security and convenience. The following diagram shows the security level compared to the convenience. Notice passwordless authentication is high security and high convenience, while passwords on their own are low security but high convenience. What's single sign-on? Single sign-on, SSO, enables a user to sign in one time and use that credential to access multiple resources and applications from different providers. For SSO to work, the different applications and providers must trust the initial authenticator. More identities mean more passwords to remember and change. Password policies can vary among applications. As complexity requirements increase, it becomes increasingly difficult for users to remember them. The more passwords a user has to manage, the greater the risk of a credential-related security incident. Consider the process of managing all those identities. More strain is placed on help desks as they deal with account lockouts and password reset requests. If a user leaves an organization, tracking down all those identities and ensuring they're disabled can be challenging. If an identity is overlooked, this might allow access when it should have been eliminated. With SSO, you need to remember only one ID and one password. Access across applications is granted to a single identity that's tied to the user, which simplifies the security model. As users change roles or leave an organization, access is tied to a single identity. This change greatly reduces the effort needed to change or disable accounts. Using SSO for accounts makes it easier for users to manage their identities and for IT to manage users. Important. Single sign-on is only as secure as the initial authenticator because the subsequent connections are all based on the security of the initial authenticator. What's multi-factor authentication? Multi-factor authentication is the process of prompting a user for an extra form or factor of identification during the sign-in process. MFA helps protect against a password compromise in situations where the password was compromised, but the second factor wasn't. Think about how you sign into websites, email, or online services. After entering your username and password, have you ever needed to enter a code that was sent to your phone? If so, you've used multi-factor authentication to sign in. Multi-factor authentication provides additional security for your identities by requiring 2 or more elements to fully authenticate. These elements fall into 3 categories. Something the user knows. This might be a challenging question. Something the user has. This might be a code that's sent to the user's mobile phone. Something the user is. This is typically some sort of biometric property such as a fingerprint or face scan. Multi-factor authentication increases identity security by limiting the impact of credential exposure, for example, stolen usernames and passwords. With multi-factor authentication enabled, an attacker who has a user's password would also need to have possession of their phone or their fingerprint to fully authenticate. Compare multi-factor authentication with single-factor authentication. Under single-factor authentication, an attacker would need only a username and password to authenticate. Multi-factor authentication should be enabled wherever possible because it adds enormous benefits to security. What's Microsoft Entra Multi-Factor Authentication? Microsoft Entra Multi-Factor Authentication is a Microsoft service that provides multi-factor authentication capabilities. Microsoft Entra Multi-Factor Authentication enables users to choose an additional form of authentication during sign-in, such as a phone call or mobile app notification. What's passwordless authentication? Features like MFA are a great way to secure your organization, but users often get frustrated with the additional security layer on top of having to remember their passwords. People are more likely to comply when it's easy and convenient to do so. Passwordless authentication methods are more convenient because the password is removed and replaced with something you have, plus something you are, or something you know. Passwordless authentication needs to be set up on a device before it can work. For example, your computer is something you have. Once it's been registered or enrolled, Azure now knows that it's associated with you. Now that the computer is known, once you provide something you know or are, such as a PIN or fingerprint, you can be authenticated without using a password. Each organization has different needs when it comes to authentication. Microsoft Global Azure and Azure Government offer the following 3 passwordless authentication options that integrate with Microsoft Entra ID, Windows Hello for Business, Microsoft Authenticator app, FIDO2 security keys. Windows Hello for Business. Windows Hello for Business is ideal for information workers that have their own designated Windows PC. The biometric and PIN credentials are directly tied to the user's PC, which prevents access from anyone other than the owner. With public key infrastructure, PKI integration, and built-in support for single sign-on (SSO), Windows Hello for Business provides a convenient method for seamlessly accessing corporate resources on premises and in the cloud. Microsoft Authenticator app. You can also allow your employee's phone to become a passwordless authentication method. You may already be using the Microsoft Authenticator app as a convenient multi-factor authentication option in addition to a password. You can also use the Authenticator app as a passwordless option. The Authenticator app turns any iOS or Android phone into a strong passwordless credential. Users can sign in to any platform or browser by getting a notification to their phone, matching a number displayed on the screen to the one on their phone, and then using their biometric touch or face or PIN to confirm. Refer to download and install the Microsoft Authenticator app for installation details. FIDO security keys. The FIDO, Fast Identity Online Alliance helps to promote open authentication standards and reduce the use of passwords as a form of authentication. FIDO2 is the latest standard that incorporates the Web Authentication, WebAuthn standard. FIDO2 security keys are an unphishable, standards-based passwordless authentication method that can come in any form factor. Fast Identity Online, FIDO, is an open standard for passwordless authentication. FIDO allows users and organizations to leverage the standard to sign into their resources without a username or password by using an external security key or a platform key built into a device. Users can register and then select a FIDO2 security key at the sign-in interface as their main means of authentication. These FIDO2 security keys are typically USB devices, but could also use Bluetooth or NFC. With a hardware device that handles the authentication, the security of an account is increased as there's no password that could be exposed or guessed.